Chairman, we're now live, so you're able to start the meeting.
Thank you very much indeed. And welcome everyone to a virtual meeting of the Audit Committee at the London Borough of Hillingdon. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to review and monitor the Council's audit, governance, risk management framework and financial and non-financial performance, as well as overseeing the financial reporting process of the Statement of Accounts. My name is John Chesshire and I am the chairman of this meeting. Before we start, some important online housekeeping for everyone present here today. Could I ask you please to ensure that any mobile phones around you are on silent? Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking and then unmute to speak. As chairman, I will call on those to speak during the meeting. In terms of technical meeting control, if any councillor leaves the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time, for example, through a lost connection or doing what I did earlier and switching myself off, I will continue the meeting unless we are not quorate. And quorate is when we have 4 members or more. We'll now undertake an attendance roll call. And before we move on to the agenda, I'd like to do the roll call of the councillors and others present to confirm attendance. Please indicate you are present when I say your name. Councillor Goddard.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Eggington.
Present, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Graham.
Chairman, I can see that Councillor Graham is on the call, so it may be that he's observing now, but just having some technical difficulties being heard.
Understood. Thank you very much, Luke, and hopefully you can join us probably shortly, Councillor Graham. Councillor Lavery.
Present, Chairman.
Good afternoon to you. And please can I ask the officers to confirm their attendance when I read out their names as well, please. Paul Wayman.
Present.
Thank you, and sorry, Paul is the Corporate Director of Finance. Muir Lowry, Deputy Director of Executive Services, Exchequer Services. Forgive me, I've been talking at the computer for 2.5 weeks. You'd think I'd be able to get it right in the end here. And Business Assurance. Sorry, Muir.
That's fine. No, present. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Sarah Hydry, Head of Internal Audit and Risk Assurance.
Present, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Zach O'Neill, Head of Counter Fraud.
Present, Chair.
Thank you, Zach. Stephanie Rao, Risk and Insurance Manager.
Present, Chair.
Thank you, Stephanie. Do we have James Lake, Chief Accountant, this afternoon?
James isn't joining us for this meeting, no.
Forgive me, and thank you, Luke. And last but certainly not least, Luke Taylor, Democratic Services Officer.
I am present, Chairman.
Okay, thank you all very much for confirming your attendance. We'll now move to the agenda. And as usual, we have a 2-part agenda. Part 1 will be heard in public. And we'll move to part 1, obviously, first. First agenda item is apologies for absence.
We've had apologies from Councillor Flynn and Councillor Graham is substituting.
Right, thank you very much, Luke. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest in matters before this meeting. I shall take it that there are no interests if nothing is declared now. Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues. Agenda item 3, to confirm the reports in private and in public on this agenda. Items 1 to 9 are part 1 and heard in public. And items 10 to 11 are part 2 and will be heard in private. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4, part 4, I should say really, to receive and agree to the minutes of our last meeting. I shall take the minutes as agreed unless there are any comments. Okay, minutes agreed then. Thank you very much indeed. We'll move now to the formal agenda items. And agenda item 5 then, the 2019-20 annual statement of accounts and audit update.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. This is a short report to update committee on changes to the timetable for the accounts production and the audit of the accounts arising from COVID in the current year. In a normal year, we would publish our draft accounts by the end of May, and the accounts would then be audited, and the audited accounts would need to be signed off by the end of July. And we would have an audit committee at the end of July, just prior to that. The rules were changed this year on the back of COVID. So the revised timelines are that draft accounts needed to be published by the end of August, and the final audited accounts need to be published by the end of November. So as a result of those revised statutory timeframes for the current year, we've revised our timetable. And as a result of that, we published our draft accounts on the 7th of August. So that was ahead of the end of August deadline. And we are looking to sign off on the final audited accounts and publish those by the end of October. And an audit committee has been set up on the 29th of October in order for you to receive that audit report prior to the accounts being published. In terms of the progress on the audit, good progress is being made by our external auditors, and they expect to be able to issue a final report in time for that audit committee at the end of October. And from what I know so far, and I had an update at the beginning of this week, they haven't found anything significant at this stage, but they expect to finalise their report in time for that meeting at the end of October. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. Councillor Goddard, I can see a hand raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a two-part question, actually, Paul, if I may. First of all, and I think so fundamentally, we did have a pretty undignified scramble at the end of last year, the previous year-end accounts on the part of the auditors. I take it from what your comments that that things are, from their perspective, much more in control this time. Is that correct?
Yes, it's been a much better year in terms of how the audit's progressed, albeit it's been a bit disjointed this year. EY were in the building March, April, May time doing part of the audit then, and they then picked it up again in September. So they've had to do it in two parts, but they're well progressed this year. And as I said, we expect, a final report to be ready this year in time for audit committee.
Thank you. And the second part of the question, I know that it was anticipated that two particular areas of emphasis for the audit were going to be the dedicated schools grant issue and asset valuations. Can you tell me? I mean, firstly, has their work proceeded satisfactory on those, and are we likely to be encountering any problems with those? And secondly, have there been any additional issues put into play as a result of COVID, or for that matter, anything else?
Okay, well, in terms of asset valuations, that work is progressing at the moment, and I think there are always issues around asset valuations. That's one point that we're never going to be in 100% agreement on in any year, but my understanding this year is that we don't have a fundamental problem on asset valuations. In terms of the DSG position, the audit of that is ongoing. Revised accounting practice and government guidance about how to account for negative DSG positions was issued prior to us producing the accounts, and we followed that guidance in full. So we've presented a negative reserve with a note attached to it saying that the council can't fund this out of its own general fund position. So we followed the guidance on that. But my understanding is that at this point in time, the National Audit Office are talking to external auditors around the accounting again, and there may be revised guidance from the NAO about how to deal with this in the accounts. If that has changed since we produced the accounts, then clearly we would have to respond to that. And in our revised accounts before they get published after the audit, we would amend them. My understanding of what the NAO are looking at is classifying the reserve as a negative, unusable reserve. So accounts within the local authority do have unusable reserves in them, which is another way of saying they're not real and they don't actually count. So if that is what the NAO finally rule, then we would change it in line with that. As it stands, we've followed accounting practice, and as was set out before, we had to produce the accounts. So that is still ongoing, and obviously I would hope by the end of October that would be resolved, and we could report back to committee on what the final presentation of negative DSG needs to be. In terms of other issues, obviously COVID is a big issue for the authority, and EY are required to review the authority as a going concern, because that's part of their opinion that they give us. So we have, as part of the audit, provided them with a huge amount of information around the impact of COVID on the authority financially and how we are managing that impact. And they are going through all of that in order to come to a conclusion on the fact that whether we're still a going concern in their eyes, which is obviously the basis on what the accounts are, how the accounts are prepared. They seem happy with what we've provided so far, but clearly they haven't concluded the audit yet, but that will be within their final opinion that they provide to Audit Committee at the end of October. So we'll get a final view from them at that point in time.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Edgington.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Paul, I was going to ask almost a supplementary question related to DSG. Do you know whether the notes to the accounts will also include the transactions this year on DSG? It's mentioned in the next agenda item of a further deficit of something like 7 million, although I believe that the latest estimates in reports to Cabinet suggest it will be a £9 million deficit. Will that be also recorded in the accounts as a note?
I will have to check on that. I haven't been told that we've been asked to include that, but obviously if it's deemed to be a material change post the accounts production, then obviously we can add that in. It's a public figure. It's in our month 4 monitoring report that's been to Cabinet, so I'll be quite happy to add it if that's what EY ask, but I don't know whether they have or not as yet.
Yeah, I would have thought it's a post-balance sheet transactional figure affecting it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lavery, any questions?
None from me.
Thank you very much indeed. And I will ask Councillor Graham. Okay, thank you very much. Paul, no further questions from me. I was going to ask a similar question about the DSG, so thank you very much for your answer to that. So we'll move on in the absence of any other questions. I'm very pleased to hear the good progress made both on our side but also by EY this year Long may that continue, and we'll look forward to hearing more at the end of the month. Which brings us on then, please, to agenda item 6, the annual internal audit report and opinion statement for 2019 to 2020.
Thank you, Chair. So just to keep the meeting running more smoothly, I'm going to talk through, introduce the item, and then I may hand over to Sarah if there's more detailed technical questions, particularly if they're difficult. So page 7 of your papers, agenda item 6, it's the annual internal audit report, and it's the head of internal audit statutory opinion. Back, just to summarise, back in March, obviously the business assurance team, including a lot of internal audit and a lot of the counter fraud team, were redeployed into the council's frontline food delivery service. So last few weeks of March, right up until June time, there wasn't a great deal of internal audit or counter fraud work being done across the authority. So in light of that, actually the report in front of you is, I see it as a very good news story. We've delivered more internal audit work this year than we did in the year before, albeit it was not by much more, but it's still more. And also the amount of assurance work as well. So we've, I think, delivered 20 assurance reviews this year in 1920 compared to 19 the year before. And in total, 49 pieces of internal audit work compared to 48 the year before. The overall head of internal audit opinion is reasonable assurance. The detail was within the report, and quite happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Muir, and welcome, Councillor Graham. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I think I'm in contact now. Can you hear me?
We certainly can. Well, welcome to this afternoon's meeting.
Well, I haven't missed anything so far. It's just that I've been trying to unmute myself, if you like.
Lovely. Well, I think we're good to go now and ready to roll. So thank you. Okay, thank you very much for the summary talk through of the report, Muir. I'll again work through in order, if I may. Councillor Goddard, again, you're sort of top of my screen. So any questions regarding the internal audit report and the HIA opinion statement?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I wonder if I could take you to the foot of page 15 and the section that continues through on to page 16. We've got a section here, 3.8.2, which is headed up. There were several significant control weaknesses identified. And I understand the point in terms of the things like the early years centres and cyber and so forth, but I was slightly bemused. I wonder whether they're sort of in a different category, actually. Points 5, 6 and 7 in there seem to me to be, if I can characterize them as such, more about the control environment rather than necessarily being control weaknesses. Am I correct in that? Because the inference is that sort of items 1 to 4 are things that the team have identified having done some work. 5, 6 and 7 seem to me to be sort of environmental things where I wouldn't have necessarily expected that the team would have carried out work.
No, you're quite right. We haven't carried out work yet, but it will be in the current year plan. Well, as part of the annual head of internal audit opinion statement, we're required to give an opinion on the overall control environment, and DSG, coronavirus and Brexit all do impact on the overall control environment.
Thank you, Muir. Councillor Goddard, any other questions or observations? I think Councillor Goddard has temporarily left the meeting. I think he's did exactly what I did earlier. Councillor Edgington, any questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, on page 26, under paragraph 511, there's reference to a recommendation which had effectively been rejected by management. And I wasn't quite sure what the employment status assessments was meant to mean. Is this the assessments to determine whether somebody is an employee or self-employed? And if so, then not doing that before the contract is signed seems to me, at least as an accountant, possibly to be contrary to the tax legislation. But it could be that I misunderstood what this refers to.
Yeah, firstly, the recommendation wasn't as such rejected. With internal audit recommendations, our approach is the 4 T's. So management chose to tolerate the risk. So they don't see it as significant as a risk as internal audit see it. We did, as I say, only 2 it set out this year, only 2 recommendations that fell into that category. But to be perfectly honest, both the head of internal audit and myself felt that that was too many. So on this one, you're right. It is to establish whether it's employment or non-employment. Sarah will correct me if I'm wrong on that. But what the process that they are following is still in compliance with the legislation. It is just there is a greater likelihood in internal audit's opinion that mistakes could happen. So we would suggest that it should be carried out in advance rather than afterwards.
So could I come back on that, Chair?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I've looked at the HMRC Employment Status Manual, and the statement there is that there's a duty to inform the person who's being contracted with. That must be complied with on or before the time of entry into the contract. And that's the legislation related to EPA 2003 and also the Social Security regulations. So to my mind, and certainly according to the tax manuals, it has to be done before the contract's entered into.
Can I suggest that we double check on that in terms of exactly when management have agreed they will carry out the check? It may be that they are carrying out the check before the contract is entered into, but they're not doing it as early as we would have liked. But if I can come back to you on that, we'll pick it up afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think that makes perfect sense. If I can just ask a follow-on question to Councillor Edgington on the same point while we're here. Is there an opportunity to speak to the former head of procurement and fleet successor to see whether they share the same desire to tolerate this audit recommendation? To tolerate the risk, associated.
As soon as my understanding is head of procurement candidates are being interviewed in the next couple of weeks, it's at the top of our list in terms of, as part of that introduction to the new head of procurement, to ask them that very question, because one senior manager that chooses to tolerate a risk, another senior manager may have a different view on that risk.
Okay, thank you very much, Muir. Councillor Goddard, sorry, you did what I did earlier, I think, and accidentally disclaimed it. Did you have any subsequent questions that you wanted to ask?
Thank you, Chairman. Now, in my haste to respond to you to assure you I didn't have any more questions, I managed to shut myself, so apologies. But no, I had no further questions on this item.
Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Edgington, did you have any follow-on questions at this point?
No, I haven't. Thank you very much, Chair.
All right, thank you too. Councillor Lavery, any questions?
Yeah, can I just go to page 16 and point number 3 regarding the payment processes in New Year's Green Lane where significant issues were identified. It does say in the report that management were working with internal audit to get these resolved and promised to take prompt action to address them It doesn't actually say have they been addressed. Is the internal audit now satisfied those issues have actually been addressed?
Yeah. I'm not actually sure. I'll get that checked and I'll come back to you. Unless, Sarah, is there anything you can add on that?
The recommendation dates are all in October, November time for the implementation, and a follow-up review for New Year's Green Lane has been planned. I will just double check for you in this financial year, because we've made it a process that will review all limited audit reports within 6 months, and a follow-up has been planned for Q4 to check that those recommendations that are outstanding, of which there are 4 high and 7 medium, have been addressed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Lavery, anything else at this point?
No, no further questions.
Lovely, thank you very much. And Councillor Graham, any questions from you at this point?
No, none at the moment, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Graham. I have a few questions, if I may, as well, please. Could I ask you to turn to page 12 of the report, please, and paragraph 2.7. And in paragraph 2.7, we say that 80% of the assurance reviews resulted in a reasonable opinion, which obviously is a good result for management there. The second part of the sentence, I didn't quite follow the logic then. If 80% of the audits are coming back broadly positive, how does this show me and the committee that audit resource is focused on the right areas, often highlighted by management as known areas of of concern? I didn't quite see that link.
I think that's a fair comment. The history has been that we've had, if you look at that 4-year pattern, there's been a greater number of limited and no assurance reports in the earlier years than there is now. So the argument could be that the control environment's improved, and so we get greater assurance from that. Whether as you say, the sentence is split down into 2 parts, whether the fact that we've got 80% of reasonable assurance, does that give us assurance that everything's okay, or does it tell the committee that actually we're not looking at the high enough risks? Don't know if there's anything, Sarah, you want to add at that stage?
I would just say that in terms of audit planning, we come with our cumulative audit knowledge and experience as well. So when these areas come to us and when we present them to audit committee, they do go through a robust risk profiling process. Often that comes with management telling us about areas of concern that they want internal audit to look at and give them assurance over. I appreciate, though, that reasonable is that there could be a contradiction in terms of those 2 sentences, but I still believe that the audits that we're doing and have been working on have been giving positive assurance that those areas of concern to management are working better or working more effectively than possibly even they thought, and that's why they've asked us to come in and check that for them.
Thank you both very much. I am slightly still concerned about this, and you know, I mean, are we looking at the right risks, I suppose, basically, or are we being steered a little too much by management into perceived concerns or concerns that they're telling us about that actually, you know, don't prove to be such a big deal when we come to look at them?
If I could add, please, Chair. I think during the 1920 financial year, audit year, there has been a considerable amount of work done by internal audit that's not captured as an assurance review, it's captured as a consultancy review. As we move into the next item, the 1920 internal audit plan for the year, you'll see that there's a great deal more assurance work And so there'll be a much greater range of assurance reviews in the current financial year than there perhaps have been in earlier years.
Thank you. And yes, we'll come on to the plan, and I've certainly got my views on that, and I think it's a very positive move in the next plan for more assurance related activity. If I could ask a subsequent question as well, please. It's on page, or it relates to an entry on page 17 next. I'm interested in paragraph 3.10.5, where we're looking at the risk management arrangements across the authority. And I suppose it's a question for you, Muir, and Sarah, but it may be a question for Stephanie as well. And I suppose if we're saying that risk maturity is still evolving, we now believe that the council has reached a risk-defined status. I suppose my question is, why aren't risk registers sort of mandated for a larger number of areas across the council? We say that they're encouraged but not mandated. Sorry, encouraged, but why are they not mandated, I suppose?
Understood, yes. It's a policy decision of the council. I think there's different ways of looking at it. The purpose of risk management is about how we as an organisation manage the key risks. At a strategic level, the corporate risk register goes to corporate management team and audit committee on a quarterly basis. Well, certainly in a normal year on a quarterly basis. The group risk registers, directorate risk registers, also are shared with corporate management team and audit committee. Within each and every service, they have different ways of managing the risk. But you're absolutely right; it is not mandated that you must use a operational risk register template.
Okay, thank you very much. We may come back to that in the risk section later. Okay, I've got just a couple of other observations more than anything, if I may. Page 21, we have a pyramid showing our COSO internal control framework. The latest, and this is a minor kind of point in the scheme of things, the more recent COSO internal control framework takes a kind of cube, a Rubik's cube shape these days, so it might be worth updating for next year's report. Page 22, at the bottom we've got chart 5, entitled comparison of assurance levels. I think we got the wrong title there as well, a minor housekeeping point. That isn't a comparison there. And then page 23, I think, is my only other question from the report. And I'm looking here at paragraphs 4.1.5 and the table in the centre of the page. And here, again, I appreciate that internal audit is not a science, and there is judgment, and there is no precise match over between levels of risk ratings in terms of recommendations made and assurance levels provided in audit reports. But I was sort of drawn to the fact that in 2019 to 2020, we've got 69% there of the recommendations the team making being high and medium in terms of risk rating, which I think is, looking at that, sort of certainly higher than the last 2 years or so. And yet 80% of the audits overall provided a kind of reasonable level of assurance. And I just wanted to try and understand the thinking there just a little bit more, if I may.
Okay, I think on the recommendations, so the high risk recommendations, the 12 high risk recommendations in 1920, and in 1819 there was 13, 1718 there was 12, in 1617 there was only 7, but in 1617 there was still 72% were high and medium combined. So I don't think it's broadly dissimilar in terms of where the recommendations are, I think it goes back to your earlier justified point around 80% of the assurance work that's been carried out, we're giving a reasonable assurance opinion. Are we being robust enough as an internal audit service? I believe we are, but are we focusing on the areas of highest risk as assurance reviews? I think there have been in 1920 some areas where we've picked it up as consultancy work, or some areas that we have yet to pick up purely due to capacity. We've delivered 20 assurance reviews in 1920. We didn't have the capacity to deliver more than that. So there may be perhaps some key areas that we need to pick up, but enough to be able to deliver the head of internal audit's overall opinion. But I think it's a point that we'll pick up in the current financial year.
Okay, thank you very much, Muir. Just two more observations, I think. Page 27 and the KPIs that the team have reported on here. The observation is, I think that's an excellent level of performance, and I was very pleased to see the actual figures reached, and even the single red. I think by the time we had the sort of 3, maybe nearly 4 weeks disruption, and during March, I'm not particularly worried about that at all. Looking at the actual performance against the other KPIs, I think well done and congratulations to the team. I think from the committee's perspective, there as the nods from some of my colleagues on the committee there. So well done to the team there. Page 28, in terms of the client satisfaction surveys, the feedback questionnaires. Again, from my perspective, that's an excellent set of results. The audit team, I think, have worked really hard and are clearly engaged well with management to get results of that level. So heartened to see that. Congratulations again to the team. And the only, I did say 2, I meant 3, of course. The only other observation, if you allow me, is on page 30, paragraph 7.6, to do with the professional development of the team. Again, there's some good news there. I'm very pleased to see that. And I think from the committee, again, if you can pass back our congratulations, particularly to the newer members of the team there who appear to have done so well. Very pleased in that as well. So overall, thank you very much for the report. It's a comprehensive report. It covers the ground well. Thank you for passing that over to us and for answering our questions this afternoon. I will just give colleagues the opportunity. Any final questions on the annual internal audit report? Okay. Well, thank you very much again, team, for that and for briefing us through that this afternoon. That brings us on then, please, to agenda item 7, the draft internal audit plan for 2020-2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can ask you to turn to Appendix C on page 53 of your papers. I think that's the most useful document contained within the plan for the year. So we've as part of a ongoing restructure of internal audit, we're putting more resource into the internal audit service for the current financial year. I do have to keep saying current financial year, I'm getting the years mixed up. So for 2021, so in a full year, that would equate in future years to 1,100 days will be in the annual internal audit plan. But even with the days lost through COVID, it's still an increase of 85 days compared to 1920. So it'll be 850 days. And the committee will see that it's 595 days for assurance work compared to 425 in the previous year. So it's a good news story. It's been combined at the same time as a restructure of the counter fraud team. So it's now allows us to focus on a wider area of assurance, which goes back to your earlier point, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'll ask colleagues first, and then I'll ask a question or two myself. Councillor Goddard, again, we'll stick with the established order.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, certainly I would have gone straight to page 53 as well, so Muir, that's helpful. I mean, I must say I'm delighted to see the increased allocation of days into assurance. I may well recall that I've expressed concern about, shall we say, the downward pressure on assurance days in previous years. So to see this increase this way, I think is absolutely excellent. And I looking at this table, I think it suggests to me very strongly that there are two things at work here. One is the the investment, the additional investment of resources in the team, and the other is, I would suggest, the elimination of some of the consultancy work. I get the team has pretty much had to respond to the requests of management for in the past. I mean, out of interest, I wonder if Muir, if you can explain how that downward adjustment on the consulting side has been managed, because I don't imagine for one moment the requests for consultancy and advice have tailed off. So how are you able to achieve reduction, please?
Yes, it's a fair question. It's been a challenge for the Internal Audit Service. Coming to Audit Committee on the 29th of October will be the detailed internal audit plan for the next quarter, and you will see the number of assurance reviews in there and very few consultancy reviews. But as you rightly point out, there have been a number of requests that we've had to turn down, or to convince management that actually they're better off having an assurance review carried out rather than a consultancy review.
Thank you very much.
And perhaps if I can just, if you, Chairman, if you allow me a supplementary on that. I guess the further challenge is, linking it into the report on 1920, just making sure that those extra days are spent in some of the key risk areas, perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps there is a need for the team to be, shall we say, quite resolute in identifying those risk areas, and perhaps not always being persuaded by management into areas that seem to perform fairly well.
It's a fair point again. As part of the pulling together both the annual internal audit plan in terms of capacity and resources, but also the feeding into the internal audit restructure and the detailed internal audit plan for quarters 3 and quarters 4, has been conducting the audit needs analysis. So looking at the changed risk universe for the council, because of course it's what COVID has done has changed everything in terms of how the council conducts its business in certain areas. For example, prior to March, there was no council food delivery service, and so it was, if I can say, it was set up with a phone call on a Friday afternoon to myself to redeploy my team ready for the Monday morning. So in an ideal world, you would set up with procedure notes, set up that new system. So it's these different risks, and it's changed across the service. We've had to do business in a different way. That's been looked at quite comprehensively by Sarah as part of pulling together her annual internal audit plan and the detailed operational plans, in the same way it's been looked at by Zach as part of him putting together his annual counter-fraud plan.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And I'll just reiterate, I think this is really a very positive step. So I'm delighted to see this, this extra resource available to the team.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Councillor Goddard. Councillor Edgington, any particular questions?
Not particularly. I think I support everything which Councillor Goddard has mentioned. I wonder whether Sarah after this meeting I can give some details of something which particularly internal audit might like to look at in the next quarter or two. Something quite serious which needs to be at least an assurance, I think.
Yeah, you can pick that up.
Okay, I'll send you the details.
Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Lavery, any questions or observations?
I suppose the one observation, I think it's been implied, but the extra days on assurance were clearly a welcome. But are the use of those extra days going to be driven by where internal audit and business assurance sees risks, rather than where management kind of feed you up a risk and ask you to go and look at it?
They'll feed totally from our risk assessment. As part of our risk assessment methodology, we give consideration to what management have to say, but actually this is a change in approach for us. It's maybe not emphasised enough in the report, but this is about being much more robust on the assurance work, on the follow-up of recommendations in a more prompt and timely manner, and on the implementation of recommendations in a more prompt and timely manner as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Graham.
No, I'm happy with the report, and also I've been pleased to hear the answers to the questions that have been put. So I've nothing further to add now.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. And from my perspective, I think I'd like to echo the comments of colleagues. I think this is an excellent plan for the year ahead, and we'll look forward with interest to seeing the subjects on the plan at our next meeting. I'm heartened to see the increase in assurance work. As Councillor Goddard mentioned, it is a subject we've spoken about at previous committee meetings, and I think definitely all in the right direction there. So very pleased indeed, and look forward to seeing the results of the work. So thank you both for that. And I very nearly pressed leave the call rather than turn the microphone off yet again. Okay, that brings us then to agenda item 8, if I may, the Counter Fraud Annual Report, also for 2019 to 2020.
Thank you, Chair. So this report summarises the work of the Business Assurance Counter Fraud team for the 2019-20 year. A year which, as we know, as I covered earlier in the agenda, was cut short. So as the committee are aware, we had a loss prevention target of £2 million. So we were, of course, the impact of COVID has been devastating globally, but as a team, we were absolutely devastated the fact that we didn't manage to quite hit the 2 million, but we did achieve 1.94 in loss prevention cost reductions across the council, which, all things considered, I think is a very good result. In terms of KPI performance as well, you'll see within the report that it's improved in all but one area. And generally speaking, the work that has been done by the counter fraud team in 1920 has exceeded 18-19 performance quite significantly in just about every single area. A lot of that has come out of the back of the fraud prevention work. We've now, similar to in the internal audit side, we've conducted a fraud needs analysis. We've looked at the fraud risks, come up with the new plan for the new year, and I'm confident, depending on what happens with COVID over the next 6 months, that this will still turn out to be a relatively successful year for the counter fraud team in terms of loss prevention for the year ahead. We've just gone through a restructure. That's something that we can maybe talk about later in the agenda. But on the result of that, I think Zach is now confident he's got the right resource at the right levels to drive forward further fraud detection and prevention work across the council. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Muir. We'll stick to the established running order if that's okay. Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite revealing that if you look at the sort of profile of loss prevention activity, that it certainly was Q4 that was hit by the COVID episode. So I think against a target of 2 million to come in at 1.94, I think is a tremendous result. And I do remember being quite skeptical about whether you were going to hit this 2 million. So I take my hat off to you and the team for a fantastic achievement. Having said that, you know what I'm going to ask you. What's the target for 2021? I cannot believe that it's going to be a smaller number. Is it?
We've actually not agreed a target for the year ahead, but I think realistically it would be 1 million would be challenging for the team, given the amount of redeployment work that happens in Q1. The Q2 was picking up some of the residual work, carrying out the planning for the new fraud universe. I don't know if there's anything Zach wants to add on that.
Yeah, it's obviously I've been waiting to see if what Paul and Muir's thoughts were on the target, but from my perspective, I think bearing in mind that almost the entire team has been redeployed throughout the first quarter of the year, and then we have obviously picked things up from July onwards and restarted work. A lot of the work that we've been doing in Q2 has been impacted by our ability to go out and can do things like conduct visits and external work outside of the council. So without wanting to try and dodge the question about a target, I think if it was 1 million, then I would obviously work with the team towards that, and I think it's something that we could try and achieve. But at the same time, it would just obviously be against the backdrop of picking things up post-COVID and trying to restart things. But I'm confident that we can obviously make some good progress in this next year with the team as we have going forward.
Yeah, and can I come back on that? I appreciate absolutely the challenges of 2021, and perhaps we need to sort of stop and remind ourselves that we're more than half the way through that year anyway, and who knows what the second wave of COVID is going to bring us. So I completely understand that there may be very good reasons why we might be looking at a reduced number this time around. Also, if you factor in the restructuring of the team that is going on, but it seems to me that with a successful team like this, to have a realistic target is a very good thing. And I appreciate it's probably still under consideration, but I would encourage the setting of a target if that is possible.
I will speak with Zach and Paul after today's meeting and make sure that there's a target included in the progress report that comes to Audit Committee at the end of October.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Councillor Goddard and Muir, Zach, for the answers. Councillor Edgington, any questions?
No, some observations, if I may, Chair. I think it was quite useful to have the benchmarking, although it's the previous year. That's Appendix D on page 76, I think it is. But it looks as though the counter fraud team have done particularly well last year, bearing in mind everything which happened towards the end of it. And let's hope that it can be continued in the future. And that's my end point.
Lovely, thank you very much, and I share those observations too. Councillor Lavery, any questions or observations?
No, none from me, thank you.
Right, many thanks indeed. And Councillor Graham.
Yes, Chair. I just wonder to what extent fraud awareness is brought to the attention of the council by the public, i.e. the residents in Hillingdon. Is there some form of advertising the fact that that's something we would like to hear about if they have concerns?
Zach, I'll let you take that one, please.
Sorry, Councillor Graham, did you mean fraud awareness being brought, so fraud issues being brought to the council by members of by residents, by members of the public?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant. Yes.
So, in terms of, I would describe that as referrals brought to our team. So, a member of the public referring via one of our information, the ways that we receive information. So that primarily is via our dedicated telephone line, and also we have an inbox, an email inbox, which members of the public can email to. And so, in terms of the numbers, members of the public have factored in quite considerably in the numbers of referrals that we have seen. And actually, in previous years, it was higher than internal referrals received. And so, one of the things that we did do in the last year was conduct a fraud awareness week, which was more accurately a fraud awareness program, which was started in around November to try and increase the numbers of internal referrals received, and which was successful. But we still do receive considerable numbers of referrals from members of the public from all areas, primarily from areas such as housing, but also from areas such as council tax and things to do with SPD or business rates and so on. So we try to, or we want to increase our exposure to the public in terms of their knowledge of ways to refer to us, and this is something that we're going to be building into the plan for this year and moving forward to raise awareness externally and internally of fraud matters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Graham. Thank you, Zach. I think really just two observations and perhaps a general question from me. I don't think the team should beat themselves up about narrowly missing the sort of challenging stretch target they set themselves or was set for them for last year. I think if March had been a normal inverted commas month, I think you'd have hit the 2 million. Looking at the kind of trend line there that we spoke about, I think a very an excellent level of performance last year. So congratulations to you all and to the team. And I suppose the second observation is ditto in respect of the KPIs. Like Councillor Goddard, I like things to be measured, and I like targets, and I like sensible performance indicators. And you know, the level of performance that the team have achieved in 2019 to 20, I think is fantastic. You know, we know that the KPIs are, were likely to evolve over time. I think we had a sort of a first year where you were a bit nervous, perhaps, about some of the targets that were set. I think you've demonstrated as a team that you can step up and deliver, very high levels of performance against, I think, demanding metrics and KPIs there. So congratulations and well done. I think echoing the feedback from my colleagues on the committee there. And I suppose the sort of general question, and I certainly don't want to go into specifics here, but do you see the sort of priority areas for your team in this area as being slightly different in the year ahead, given the changed environment that we're now in? Are there going to be different areas of focus or more of the same?
Well, yes and no. I'll let Zach come in as well, but there's obviously, without going into too much detail, there's grant work. So the business assurance team we've redeployed and involved in paying out a lot of grants that came to the authority through central government. The government are estimating that there's a risk of as much as 10 to 15% of that fraud and error. So that would be a new area of work that we will certainly consider as part of the fraud universe, but also increased risks around contracts and around schools, as well as other areas that we'll be looking at that are more COVID related.
Okay, and I appreciate we can't go into details there. Maybe we can pick that up in part 2 if we need to. But thank you very much indeed, and a good report, a clear report, and as far as I think the committee are concerned, you know, an excellent performance. Yeah, I see nods again. Well done, team, for that. Thank you. And that brings me to agenda item 9, the Audit Committee Forward Programme for the next year or so. I don't know that we have got any, you know, there's no changes there. Can we confirm that the dates? I see Muir. Sorry, far away, Muir.
Sorry, I've just spotted that for the 29th of October meeting, I think we've still got listed in there the Q1 corporate risk register and the annual risk management report. They're on the agenda tonight, so they should be removed from that. And then for the 4th of February meeting, it will be the Q2 and Q3 corporate risk register combined that will be presented at the February Audit Committee meeting.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. We'll get that changed for the next forward look. Any other suggestions for agenda items or changes or anything else added?
Chairman, just one question from me.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery.
Are we, given that the next meeting's only 4 weeks away in the current COVID situation, is that likely to be a virtual meeting again?
I believe it probably is. Unless we hear anything different to the contrary, we'll stick with this format for next time too. Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
Actually, Chairman, thank you. Councillor Lavery asked the very same question that I was going to raise. So,
all right, thank you very much. And I did note the broad support across colleagues for a virtual meeting. So thank you very much. Brings us then to the end of the public part of this meeting. We will now be moving to part 2 of the meeting. So can I please ask that the committee and officers remain on while we cut the live stream to YouTube. Thank you very much for coming to watch this evening, and much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chairman. If everyone could just remain muted, I will cut the stream. It will take a few moments given a delay, but then I'll let you know when we're ready to go.